Welcome to episode number 271, Anger Addiction. I'm your host, Damon Soka. Have you ever felt any of these emotions? Anger, hostility, frustration, irritation? If you've had depression or anxiety for any length of time, I can almost certainly say that you have likely experienced them in droves. But why? Why do we fall into patterns of irritation, frustration, and anger? Why do we get agitated and irritated when we are depressed? The fact is that many individuals know when they are depressed by these very emotions. Now, I didn't ever really understand the reason until I met someone who used it in a very unique way, and I was able to see it firsthand. This wonderful woman I knew had deep-seated emotional issues stemming from childhood that caused some pretty severe to moderate depression on a regular basis. She hated the lack of energy that depression caused, but she wouldn't admit that she had depression. However, the signs were obvious, and we discussed it a time or two, but to little avail. She would not be convinced. What I learned from her changed my perspective about anger, irritation, frustration, and hostility. Every morning, this wonderful woman would turn on the radio and listen to the talk radio of injustice. You know the kind. The program that makes you feel like the world owes you something, that the world has created injustices to which you must be repaid. She would do this every day. And then her day would get started when she was sufficiently agitated. She would listen and get angry at the injustice and use the energy of the anger to get her through the day. You see why she was using these emotions as coping mechanisms. Now, I know that seems a little strange and a little wonky. Why use anger as a coping mechanism? While anger and frustration have very little good to them, one thing does stand out. If you get angry enough, your energy will increase, and you will feel motivated, at least in a contentious way. When you can't find energy any other way, many individuals turn to anger and feelings of injustice to keep them motivated. So this wonderful woman listened to talk radio, the kind that focuses on the injustices of life and particularly politics. While she did not see it, she was using this program to get her energized for the day. She hated the feelings of depression, but could live with being a little hostile and combative. Many individuals follow this same routine when they find themselves within the confines of a lack of desire or energy to accomplish anything in their life because of their illness. I myself have used this method a time or two to get things done that needed to be accomplished. Not particularly proud of it. The problem we find with this type of coping mechanism is that it has dire effects upon those around you. Now, I don't doubt that we all understand that life isn't fair, that injustices exist we can't fix. However, hearing about them over and over again in the sense of anger does not provide for a very good relationship with anyone. When we use the anger coping method, we tend to lose a great deal of our good relationships and we drift to the poor ones. We tend to fall in with people of the same persuasion who also feel these slights and injustices in their life. Now, don't get me wrong, not everyone who uses anger as a method of inspiration has mental illness. We naturally desire justice and fairness. It is one of the many virtues of the light of Christ in our lives, and we should be grateful and strive for such things. But when the emotion of anger overtakes our life and becomes a part of us and who we are, we have gone too far into the weeds, and in an instant we can turn from wheat ready to harvest to a tare ready to be pulled and burned. Yes, anger and hostility have that effect upon our lives and the lives of others. The descent into a pattern of anger is actually a very slippery slope for those with mental illness, and it is devastating to their illness and their outward relationships and their inward relationship with themselves. You see, angry people are often angry at themselves, and depression doesn't improve this condition. It compounds it. No doubt, some of you now realize that you've been doing all of your life to cope with depression and anxiety. But how do you avoid this easy-to-find coping mechanism? How do you redirect your life so that anger, injustice, hostility are not your companions? The answer to this coping mechanism is not easy. The first part is the easy part, and then it only gets more difficult and complicated from the point of recognition. Anger is not an easy emotion to erase, and when you have made it a habit, it can't just be removed in one day. Habitual anger brought about by serious mental illness is a terrible vice in one's life that is as addictive as any illegal substance could be. Once you recognize the anger, the real struggle is going to begin. First, you're going to need to reduce exposure to those things that cause or instigate your anger. You are likely using something in your life to create this anger energy. What are those things? Talk radio, news, media, friends, family, gossip groups, whatever the origin you need to reduce the inputs, and that can be very difficult. Most of the time, you will not be able to just quit watching or listening to them. That is the addiction. Almost everyone who tries to quit cold turkey, as it were, fails and returns to the habit. The reason is simple. Your energy will fall through the floor. So you will need to do two things at once. Reduce your listening time to the injustices of life and replace them with good sources of information. This is not going to be easy, and you're likely going to fail many times. You need to reduce your anger energy in small bursts. The key to success is failure, meaning consistent small progress. If you're able to reduce your time listening by 20%, consider that a big win. Don't fixate on the other 80%. If you do, then you are likely to return to your old patterns of 100%. As you reduce the anger instigating factors, you will need to find something to replace that time. I wish I could tell you exactly what to do here, but the answer truly depends upon you. If I told you to replace the anger instigation with music, you might do well and choose music that works for you and your illness. But you could also choose music that incites anger and violence, such as hard, loud music with, of course, anger-inducing lyrics. You need to find things that interest you and motivate you in different ways. This will be terribly difficult with depression, where you don't really feel like doing anything. So the hard part will be replacing the anger energy. One of the keys to this is to understand that you will not have the same type of energy, and you will at times have feelings of depression that will drive you back to the injustices and anger again. Again, the key to success is to keep trying. Now, you could learn a new skill, learn to paint, take up some form of interesting exercise. What I mean by interesting is if I tried to take up running as a new hobby, I can tell you it would not last long. I don't find it interesting or particularly enjoyable. However, tennis might interest me as my mind is focused on other things while I exercise. The key to replacing anger energy is to find things that interest you that do not deal with the injustices of life. Once you've begun that process of replacement, you should consider the process a lifetime event. Anger addiction is like an addiction to alcohol. You're going to always be in recovery. If you allow yourself to slip for a moment and simply revert back to your old ways for a few days, you are likely to find that you have lost more than a few days of progress of your addiction. You need to see anger as an addiction to the emotion and the chemistry. The emotion causes chemistry that rewards you with the energy. You are addicted to a particular type of chemistry running in your body, and it takes significant time to get that chemistry to change. The particular drug of energy is very addictive in its nature. If you can summon energy at any time you want just by getting angry about something, then you've found a very, very addictive substance. If you treat it more as an addiction rather than a coping mechanism, you will find that working with it will be much easier. Now, I know that nobody likes the idea of an addiction or having one, but admitting that an addiction to injustice and anger is a terrible vice is actually a pretty good start. So why is anger such a problem? It drives out the Spirit of the Lord and what spirit you might be able to feel. One of the main reasons the Savior warned against contention and anger is that this particular type of addiction where we can be consistently angry at the world. The most difficult outcome of addiction is the loss of the Spirit of the Lord. When we give in to anger, hostility, frustration, we really give ourselves over to Lucifer. He has far greater access to our lives when we are angry, and he can inspire us to do things we typically would not otherwise do. When we become addicted to anger, we give ourselves over to him on a more consistent basis. This doesn't necessarily mean that he controls us, but he can influence us to a much greater degree. Anger addiction is one of the most common forms of apostasy within the church that is not necessarily considered personal apostasy. But think about what it does. It alienates you from your family and friends. It drives contention in your life on a consistent basis. It removes the Spirit of the Lord. You feel less and less happy and peace as you give into its control. Think about the times that you are anger inspired. Do you think about doing good things and helping other people? Generally, no. Resolve the injustice? Yes. But for the most part, news sources, talk radio, music, media, and friends are not going to give you a problem to resolve. They just want to hand you an axe to grind. They need you to come back for more. If a problem can be solved, then it doesn't serve their purpose. That is why there are so many talk shows about politics and sports. There is no real answer or real solution that can be implemented, but they can get you angry about it and keep you coming back for more. So the real question is, where are you in your anger addiction? Do you have an addiction? Do you seek out sources of injustice to grind your axe all day long? Do you seek anger or injustice to motivate you to work and to play and to participate? And then you need to ask much more deeper personal questions. How is this anger affecting my life and those around me? Where is my relationship with the Savior? How often do I receive revelation? Are those around me consistently walking on eggshells, as it were, tiptoeing around me so that my anger energy doesn't suddenly burst upon them? This is actually a good question for almost everyone. How often do I find myself in the angry world of injustice? How often do I think through anger's emotions? How often am I kind, considerate, loving, believing, and nurturing to others, which is the opposite of angry? The answers will be yours, but I hope that you will consider my plea to avoid this anger energy. That is, destroying your spiritual life. Yes, the road is difficult without it, but in the end, the road back will be far more difficult if you are addicted to its behaviors. This includes the other side of the veil, when we are addicted, because these addictions train our spiritual nature. The addictions travel with us into the afterlife, where we will need to unlearn them without a body. And from what I hear, it is far more difficult than here. Now, a final caution. People don't expect others to make significant changes in their lives. And when you do, your friends, family, and those around you are going to change. If you are addicted to anger, then your friends will likely be other addicts. And making significant changes in these friendships will cause those friends to leave and eventually others to come. But that takes time. It generally takes more time for others to accept the changes in our lives than it does for us to make those changes. So we must be patient with others as we make significant changes so that they can accept the new direction in our lives. I hope that in the end you will see anger for what it really is, a counterfeit to true energy and happiness. I know that controlling our anger addiction will improve our lives in many ways and the lives of those around us. Until next week, do your part so that the Lord can do his.